My name is Marissa Dwyer, and even now at 35, there are mornings when I catch a glimpse of someone I used to be in the mirror above the bathroom sink. In our modest craftsman home tucked into the quiet streets of Mariners Bluff, Oregon, I fix the hem of my sapphire sweater, smoothing the fabric as it clings softly to my shape. My copper blonde hair, coaxed into soft waves after 20 minutes with a curling wand, frames a face I know too well. Bright green eyes, a jaw that tightens when I fake a smile, and lips that have become skilled at pretending. My husband, Graham Dwyer, now 54, has dulled with time. His energy, once wild and compelling, has faded into routines: black coffee, predictable commutes, and nights lost to whatever history series autoplayed on his tablet. He used to sweep me into spontaneous walks through pine-shrouded trails, whispering words that made my knees weak. Now, he hardly lifts his gaze when I walk into the room. I get dressed with purpose. Straight-cut jeans, pearl earrings, a mist of gardenia behind each ear, like armor. It's not for Graham anymore, not really. His disinterest stings worse with every attempt he doesn't notice. Each night, I hover by the doorway, hoping for his eyes to flicker with recognition. Instead, he scrolls through weather reports or documentaries on deep-sea exploration while I stand still, aching to be seen. Outside our home, in the sleepy, ocean-salted lanes of Mariners Bluff, others do notice. The barista at the cafe tells me my laugh is warm. Mrs. Kendricks from the florist shop says blue suits me. Even Jim at the post office remembers how I take my mail. Their kindness reminds me I haven't vanished. Not entirely. But at home, I'm fading. A quiet passenger in a house that once felt full of color. Except there's someone whose attention feels different. Sharper. And it's from someone who shouldn't be looking at me that way. Noah is our son. 17 now. Tall, with dark wavy hair and eyes like the sea before rain. He's always been my shadow. As a kid, he trailed me through weekend markets and held my hand tightly at crosswalks. These days, his hand carries books about oceanography and his shoulders the quiet intensity of someone who doesn't fit in easily with others his age. We talk, often, about his plans to study marine science, his disdain for small talk, how the girls at school don't interest him because they're too busy pretending. But something has shifted between us. I feel it. A subtle undercurrent in the way he watches me stir a pot of soup or reach for a mug on the top shelf. Last week, while I was peeling peaches by the sink, Noah leaned against the counter and said, "That necklace makes your neck look elegant." I laughed it off, blaming the sweetness on his mood, but I could feel heat rising to my cheeks. It was the way he said it, low, thoughtful, deliberate. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but it stayed with me. He notices details Graham hasn't for years. A new shade of lip gloss. A different perfume. The way I pin my hair to the side. His compliments drop into my world like small stones, leaving rings of emotion that spread far wider than I want them to. I tell myself he's just being sweet, just observant. But some nights, when I'm lying beside a man who no longer reaches for me, I wonder if there's more to the tension I feel. This morning, I stood over the stove stirring cinnamon into our oatmeal when Noah walked in with his hoodie half-zipped and his backpack slung carelessly. He stopped and smiled softly. "That sweater brings out your eyes. Like sea glass in the sun." The words froze me. For a moment, I couldn't move. I clutched the wooden spoon like a lifeline, blinking at the floor. No one said something like that to me in years. I mumbled a reason to leave the room and fled to the laundry room. Leaning against the cold dryer, I tried to steady my breath. All day at the bookstore, I carried his words with me like a weight tucked behind every smile I gave to customers. They weren't easy words to forget. When I got home, Graham was already sunk into his recliner, earbuds in, lost in a podcast about maritime disasters. He didn't look up. Didn't notice the silk scarf I'd picked to match the weather, or the way I'd applied eyeliner for the first time in weeks. The silence in our house felt thick, like mist rolling down the cliffs beyond our backyard. Noah, though, he noticed. He always did. He noticed when I hummed along to an old record, or switched to a softer shampoo. His eyes didn't miss a thing. And while part of me wanted to draw a line, build a wall, something deeper, something I haven't let myself admit, longed to bask in the attention just a little longer. Now, I fear the moments when it's just the two of us. Not because I don't trust him, but because I'm afraid of what I feel when he sees me like I'm still someone worth seeing. By nightfall, I crawl into bed beside Graham, who doesn't stir when the sheets rustle. The room is silent except for his steady breathing. I lie there staring into the dark, wondering how I ended up on this edge, caught between guilt and desire, between loyalty and longing. And I wonder if it's already too late to find my way back. It was a dreary Tuesday, the sky over Seabourn Hollow hanging heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the rooftops. I was in the dining room, hunched over a stack of mail, trying to sort out utility bills as rain tapped a quiet rhythm against the glass. That's when Noah stormed in through the front door, his expression a mix of disbelief and something more guarded, flickering between amusement and something edged in heat. He dropped his backpack with a thud, sneakers squeaking against the hardwood. "You're not going to believe what happened at lunch today," he said, eyes wide with that kind of energy that pulled me in whether I wanted it to or not. I set aside the cable bill, heart stuttering for no good reason, and asked calmly, "What happened?" Noah began pacing, his hands slicing through the air with each word. He told me he'd been sitting in the cafeteria when he overheard a cluster of juniors cracking jokes over someone's phone screen. One of them, Jake, he said, was flashing a photo around, and when Noah leaned in out of habit, there I was. On Jake's phone. My face in a snapshot I'd posted last month, me in a cobalt dress at the harbor, wind tugging strands of my hair as I smiled into the sea. My pulse spiked. I tried to keep my voice even as I asked if he was sure. Maybe it wasn't me. Maybe he'd confused the moment. But Noah shook his head, stepping closer, his voice sharper. "It was you. The one where you wrote, coasting into calm." I'd know that photo, anywhere. The air felt thick, like the walls were closing in. I asked him, almost afraid of the answer, what he did next. He gave a crooked grin, something a little dangerous behind it. I walked up to Jake and asked why he had a picture of my mom saved on his phone. His voice had taken on a cold precision that I'd never heard before. He said the table went quiet. Jake fumbled, trying to laugh it off, saying he'd found it online and just thought I looked nice. Noah wasn't buying it. He told me he snatched Jake's phone right out of his hand, flipped through the gallery just to make sure there weren't others. I gasped. My hand flew to my lips, torn between shock and an ache I couldn't define. I told him he couldn't just grab someone's phone like that it could have gotten him into real trouble. But he stood his ground, arms crossed, and said it was just the one photo, but that wasn't the point. "They don't get to act like that," he muttered. "Not about you." I rubbed my temples, unsure what I was feeling anymore. I asked why it bothered him so deeply, even as part of me already knew. Noah's gaze locked with mine, burning with something fierce. "Because you're not just anyone to me," he said quietly. "You're my mom, and you deserve to be respected." The weight of his words hung between us, too dense to ignore. I stood abruptly, murmuring something about starting dinner, needing the motion to distract from the storm building in my chest. In the kitchen, I fumbled with pots and pans, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to focus on the mundane. But his voice kept echoing in my ears, clear, protective, raw. It was the kind of fierce loyalty I hadn't felt from Graham in years, if ever. And though I told myself it was nothing but pride, something else curled inside me. Something heavier. That night, lying beside Graham, who fell asleep with his back turned, as always, I stared into the dark, thinking of Noah's intensity, the way he stood for me like no one else had in so long. I told myself it was maternal pride. I wanted to believe it. But the warmth in my chest, the way my breath caught remembering his words, it was something murkier. Sleep didn't come. The rain continued outside, soft but persistent, and I couldn't help but feel something fundamental had shifted. Something I couldn't take back. The days that followed were quiet but charged. Noah started bringing me things. unexpected, thoughtful things. A cappuccino from the college cafe, a second-hand bookmark shaped like a seahorse because it reminded him of a novel I'd once loved. Every gift was small, but each felt personal, weighted. I thanked him with a smile, light and casual, while the inside of me felt pulled tight, like strings I couldn't untangle. Then came Thursday. I was at the sink washing dinner plates, the warm water soothing against my palms, the scent of lemon soap lingering in the air. Without a word, Noah stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. The hug was brief, casual by most standards. But it felt different. Too familiar. Too much. I chuckled, leaning back just enough to ease the tension building beneath my ribs. "What was that for?" I asked, keeping my tone light and playful, even though something about the warmth of Noah's arms still lingered on my skin. He didn't let go right away. Instead, his chin came to rest gently on my shoulder. "I just felt like it," he murmured. "You always look prettiest when you're caught off guard." My hand stilled mid-scrub, the sponge slipping slightly against the plate. I stepped away, careful not to react too much, and turned to face him. I searched his expression, unsure of what I hoped to see, or feared to. Noah's eyes danced with playful energy, but beneath it, something deeper pulsed. He suddenly grinned. "I've got something planned for tomorrow," he said. "You're gonna love it. But I'm not spoiling anything. Just be ready by noon." Drying my hands on a dish towel, I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like scheming," I teased, half expecting him to deflect like he always did. He shrugged with that crooked half-smile. "It's not a scheme, it's a memory. Trust me, you won't forget it." The next morning, I stood in my bedroom, staring at hangers and folded cardigans like they were riddles I couldn't solve. My fingers lingered on a summer dress I hadn't worn since before the pandemic. It felt too whimsical, too exposed. Eventually, I chose a teal one-piece under a breezy wrap and light jeans, practical, safe, but flattering enough that I still felt something. I couldn't admit to myself what that something was. Noah was already waiting by the door, full of restless energy, wearing cargo shorts and a worn tee. "Come on, we've got the day," he said, jangling the keys. "Don't make me drag you." We drove out of Mariner's Bluff, the road winding past pine-shaded backroads and sleepy coastline. I made guesses. The lighthouse, that new waffle truck at the beach, maybe a gallery downtown. He just shook his head each time, tapping the wheel in rhythm with a beat I couldn't hear. When we turned into a gravel lot near the bay, and I saw the kayak shack just beyond the docks, my heart did something strange. There, against the misty horizon, the rental sign hung crooked in the breeze. I stared for a moment, unsure if I'd heard myself speak. "You remember that?" I asked, the words smaller than I meant. He turned off the engine and looked at me. "You told me years ago. Something about paddling the coast, feeling like you could just drift and never stop." I remembered. "You might have forgotten, but I didn't." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and followed him toward the dock where a two-person kayak bobbed in place, its yellow shell reflecting back a sliver of light. The woman handing out life vests gave us a quick rundown, but I barely processed her instructions. My eyes were fixed on Noah as he adjusted my straps with gentle fingers, his touch feather-light but sure. His hands brushed over my shoulders, slow, careful. I pretended not to notice how still I'd become. We pushed off the dock, him behind me, his paddle slipping into rhythm as he murmured instructions over the sound of our strokes. I felt awkward at first, my arms stiff, the kayak wobbling slightly, but then I found a rhythm, his steady presence behind me giving me confidence. I laughed, a real, full laugh that caught me by surprise. "This is ridiculous," I called back, wiping sea spray from my cheek. Noah's voice came behind me, bright with laughter. "You're crushing it. Next stop, seal racing." I laughed harder, the noise tumbling out of me like sunlight. For the first time in months, I felt it, something alive and real stirring in me. Out there, with only ocean around us and the cliffs to one side, I forgot what it felt like to be invisible. For those hours, I was just Marissa again. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother. Just myself. When my shoulders finally began to ache, we let the kayak drift. Noah's paddle rested in his lap. I turned slightly, watching the water shimmer behind us, and found his eyes fixed on me. There was something quiet in his gaze, soft but unflinching. "It's beautiful," I said, meaning more than just the view. "You're welcome," he replied, and when I asked how I could ever repay him, he shook his head. "You already did. Seeing you like this? That's everything." I turned away, looking toward the horizon where the clouds were starting to break, sunlight spilling like silk onto the water. Something inside me gave way. Something I couldn't put back. It wasn't just the view. It was Noah. His memory. His effort. His hands steadying me. His voice knowing what I needed before I said a word. We paddled back in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because the moment had already spoken enough. Once we docked, I stumbled a little climbing out, my legs unsteady. Noah reached out and caught my hand, just briefly, grounding me. "Thank you," I said, voice hushed. "Anytime, Marissa," he replied. My name, not Mom. The drive home was quiet. The radio stayed off. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, and I watched the road like it was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. Because I didn't dare turn and meet his eyes. That night, I stood at the sink in our narrow bathroom, brushing my hair in slow, rhythmic strokes. The mirror reflected a woman who looked almost unfamiliar, cheeks pink from ocean wind, eyes shining with a brightness I hadn't seen in a long time. A woman who looked awake. Graham was already in bed, curled toward the wall like always, his breathing deep and even. I paused in the doorway, watching him. When had I stopped hoping he'd turn around? When had I stopped expecting him to look at me and really see who I still was? Noah did. His attention filled the cracks Graham left behind, his observant comments, his thoughtful gifts, the way he defended me so fiercely it left my heart unguarded. I hated how much it mattered. How much I needed it. How much I had missed being seen. I slipped beneath the covers beside my husband, the sheets cool against my skin. But sleep never came. My mind drifted, back to the waves lapping at the kayak, Noah's steady voice behind me, his laughter rising over the cliffs, and his hand brushing mine. That warmth still clung to my skin like salt in the breeze. I couldn't stay in bed. The house was silent, its shadows stretched long, and I padded downstairs barefoot, hoping a glass of water might quiet the current twisting inside me. Noah was already there. He stood in the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter with a mug in his hands, the soft glow of moonlight catching the side of his face. When he saw me, his lips lifted into a tired but knowing smile. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, arms crossed against the chill. "Thought some tea might help," I said, though we both knew it wouldn't. Without a word, he turned toward the stove and filled the kettle, his movements fluid and familiar, like we'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Maybe we had. He handed me a mug, and when our fingers touched brief, unplanned, it felt like a spark skimming the surface of still water. I looked up. He was already watching me. The space between us shrank, not with movement, but with silence. The kind of silence that swells with the weight of everything unspoken. The kitchen, cast in silver and shadow, felt suspended, held still by the tension we hadn't named but could no longer deny. I should have said goodnight. I should have stepped back. But I didn't. Because in that sliver of night, in that quiet kitchen filled with moonlight and heartbeats, he was the only one who made me feel visible.
Real.
Wanted.
We didn't speak.
We didn't move. And yet, somehow, we were closer. His breath grazed my cheek. My heart slammed against my ribs. And then just as quickly, I pulled away. My mug trembled in my hands as I turned toward the hallway. "I should get to sleep," I murmured, the words thin and shaky. Noah nodded, but his eyes held mine like an anchor. "Good night," he said. It sounded like goodbye, like apology, like everything we both knew, but couldn't say. I climbed the stairs with legs that didn't feel like my own and slid back into bed beside a man who never stirred. Graham snored softly, his presence more distant than the ocean beyond our windows. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows gave way to dawn, replaying that moment by the sink over and over. What hadn't happened? What almost had? Noah saw me, and that mattered more than it should. The next morning came too quickly. The kitchen smelled of coffee and guilt. I measured the grounds with shaking hands, willing myself to act normal, to pretend that the ground beneath me hadn't cracked. Graham shuffled in, eyes glued to his phone. He muttered something about work emails. Didn't notice the soft blush blouse I'd chosen. Didn't comment on the way I'd brushed my hair. I handed him his coffee, with a smile, so tight it could have snapped. Noah appeared a few minutes later. His curls were still damp, a towel slung around his neck. When he looked at me and said, "You look really nice today," I felt it. A warmth I didn't want. A dread I couldn't escape. I mumbled thanks and turned to the sink, gripping the edge until my knuckles whitened. I prayed he wouldn't say more, that he'd walk out before I fell deeper into something I couldn't explain. He didn't push, just grabbed an apple and headed out the door. But before he left, he glanced back, brief, quiet, searching. And that one look stayed with me, followed me to the bookstore where I smiled at customers and shelved paperbacks with hands that trembled. That evening, I found myself on the porch, wrapped in an old sweater, watching the waves roll in beneath a sky streaked with gray. Noah came out a moment later, carrying 2 mugs of tea.
Chamomile.
He sat beside me without a word, and I took the mug he offered. His nearness was both comfort and chaos. And I didn't know which one I wanted more. He sat beside me, closer than he should have, and the warmth from his body felt like a current tugging me toward a place I didn't want to name. "I've been thinking about you," Noah said quietly, his voice low against the hush of the waves. "You deserve more than this. You deserve to feel alive, not like you're fading in someone else's story." His words hit harder than I expected. They felt too close, too true. I turned away from him, eyes fixed on the ocean stretching beyond the bluff. My chest tightened. "You can't say things like that," I whispered, the tremor in my voice giving me away. "I'm your mother. We have to keep this clear, no matter what either of us feels." He didn't argue, just nodded, his face unreadable in the moonlight. But when his hand brushed mine on the porch swing, lingering longer than it should have, I pulled away. My breath caught, and I stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air, though the night was already thick with it. Inside, Graham was asleep in his recliner, mouth parted slightly, snoring softly. He hadn't moved since dinner. I watched him for a long moment, and I realized this couldn't be it. I couldn't keep living this way, half visible, half loved. But the answer didn't lie in Noah's eyes, no matter how deeply he saw me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I enrolled in a marine biology course at the local community college, something I'd once dreamed of before marriage and motherhood folded my life into smaller shapes. I did it not because of Noah or Graham or anyone else, but because something inside me had shifted. I wanted to find myself again, not in someone's reflection, but in my own. When I told Noah, his smile flickered. Pride glinted in his eyes, but there was something else, something quieter, a hint of goodbye. He knew. We both did. We'd reached the edge of something we could never cross, and I was choosing to turn back. Weeks passed. My days became fuller, richer. I joined a weekend research group through the college, cataloging kelp beds along the coast. We set out early, hauling nets and gathering samples. My hands grew calloused. My muscles ached, but I felt strong,
Whole.
present. And I didn't need anyone to watch me to know I was alive. One evening, the boat bobbed gently beneath a slate sky, and I found myself alone on deck. The others were below, writing reports. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handful of sea glass, bits I'd collected over the years. Smooth edges, shimmering blues and greens. Each piece a sliver of who I'd once been, wife, mother, woman searching. I scattered them into the waves, one by one. Then I whispered into the salt wind, I'm enough. The ocean took my words, tucking them into its endless rhythm. And for the first time in years, I believed it. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Mariner's Bluff rolled into spring, wildflowers blooming along the cliffs, and the sea air turned soft with the promise of change. I tried to stay anchored in the life I'd chosen, one of discipline, of discovery, of quiet independence. I filled my days with lectures and tide charts, research papers, and tide pool samples. But there were nights when I'd pause, halfway through a journal entry, and feel the ache again. A space inside me still waiting to be filled by something only one person ever touched.
Noah.
I didn't reach out. Neither did he. We'd made our choices. I told myself it was better this way.
Cleaner. Safer.
But longing is never tidy. And some truths don't dissolve with time. It happened on a rainy Thursday. I was in the old used bookstore off Harbor Street, fingers trailing over the spines of field guides and poetry, when I turned, and there he was.
Noah.
Standing just beyond the doorway like he'd stepped out of memory and into this fragile moment. His hair was longer now, curls damp from the rain. He looked older, more tired maybe, but still him. Still carved into the deepest parts of me. Our eyes met, and neither of us looked away. We didn't speak at first.
Didn't need to.
Everything we'd buried surged between us. The moonlit silence, the things we never said, the way my name had once trembled on his lips. I stepped toward him, slowly, like if I moved too fast, the whole world might fracture. But he didn't wait. Noah closed the distance in one breath, one heartbeat. His hand cradled my face, fingers trembling like he'd dreamed of this, like I had haunted him the way he haunted me. And then our mouths met. There was no hesitation, no apology. It was fire and salt, memory and need. The kiss wasn't soft. It was everything we'd held back. All the nights we'd pretended. All the words we didn't dare speak. It was months of silence shattered in a single, breathless moment. When we finally broke apart, my forehead rested against his, tears slipping down my cheeks without shame. I missed you, he whispered. His voice cracked. Every single day. I closed my eyes, nodding. Me too. He brushed his thumb along my jaw, so gently it made me ache. I tried to let you go. I know, I breathed. So did I. We stood there in the quiet of the bookstore, the rain tapping against the windows, the scent of old pages rising around us. It didn't matter where we were, only that we were here.
Now.
Together. Later, we walked the cliffs just beyond the bluff, where the ocean screamed below and the wind tangled through our hair. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There are connections that don't unravel, no matter how hard you pull. No matter how wrong they seem to the world outside. In Noah's eyes, I saw not just the boy who had once defended me, but the man who never stopped seeing me when I'd forgotten how. And in that space between guilt and longing, we let ourselves belong. Not forever. Not publicly. But in the fierce, private truth of two hearts that refuse to forget. And for now, that was enough.